In rural Pennsylvania, a desperate mother was about to make a deadly purchase. What started as house hunting took a shocking turn when Maria Santos encountered the abandoned Whitmore children's home. Santos wasn't your typical buyer. For 15 years, she had worked as a social worker, known for protecting vulnerable children. When she bought the Gothic Orphanage for $50, she had no idea she was walking into danger. Santos discovered Nazi-stolen artwork worth $300 million hidden in the basement. What began as survival would become supernatural warfare. The community would never recover after ghost children finally found justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Santos pressed her forehead against the kitchen window, watching Elena and Miguel play in the narrow courtyard behind their apartment building. The final eviction notice lay crumpled on the counter behind her, its red letters burned into her memory. 30 days to vacate. She'd read it 3 times, hoping the words would somehow change. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through their cramped 2-bedroom apartment, highlighting the water stains on the ceiling and the places where the wallpaper had begun to peel. Carlos would have fixed those things. Carlos would have found a way to make their deposit for a new place, would have charmed the landlord into giving them more time. But Carlos was 6 months buried, and his construction company had offered nothing but a form letter expressing their condolences when his scaffolding collapsed. No negligence on the company's part, the lawyer had said. These things happen in construction. These things happen to other people, not to families with 2 young children and a mortgage on dreams that died with a single phone call. Elena's laughter drifted through the glass, bright and innocent despite everything. At 12, she carried herself with a gravity that made Maria's chest ache. Too much awareness, too much understanding of their situation. Miguel, only 8, still believed his mother could fix anything. The weight of that faith pressed against Maria's shoulders like lead. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. Mrs. Santos? This is Harold Brennan from the Millbrook City Planning Department. The voice was nervous, rushed. I have a proposition that might interest you. Maria's grip tightened on the phone. Propositions from city officials usually meant more problems, not solutions. I'm listening. There's a property. The old Whitmore Children's Home on Riverside Road. Been vacant for decades. The city needs to. Well, we need to transfer ownership quickly. Very quickly. Why are you calling me? A pause. Papers rustling. Your name came up in our database. Recent housing applications. Current financial hardship. Look, Mrs. Santos, I'm going to be direct with you. This property has been a drain on city resources for years. Vandalism, trespassing, insurance liability. We need it off our books. What's the catch? $50. Cash sale as is condition. No city warranties, no repairs, no utilities guaranteed. You'd be responsible for everything from the moment you sign. Maria's breath caught. $50 for a house? There has to be something wrong with it. It has a reputation. Local folks think it's cursed. Lost some children back in the 40s under tragic circumstances. People won't go near it. His voice dropped, but it's structurally sound. 15 acres. Gothic revival architecture. In the right hands, with enough work. Maria closed her eyes. A house for $50. A chance to give her children a roof over their heads that couldn't be taken away by missed rent payments. When can I see it? How about now? The drive to Riverside Road took 20 minutes through increasingly rural Pennsylvania countryside. Elena sat silently in the passenger seat, her sketchbook open but her pencil still. Miguel chattered from the back seat about everything except where they were going, his 8-year-old mind treating the expedition like an adventure. Maria had spent the drive on her phone, researching what she could find about the Whitmore Children's Home. The results made her stomach tighten. Built in 1923 as a progressive institution for orphan children, operational until 1946, when it closed suddenly after a series of unexplained deaths. 7 children had died in a 6-month period, all attributed to various illnesses, but the local newspaper from that era raised questions the city seemed eager to forget. No one had lived in the building since. The orphanage materialized through the trees like something from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of dark stone and soaring windows, with towers that pierced the sky and cast shadows across overgrown lawns. Ivy crawled up the walls and several windows were boarded over. The iron gate at the entrance stood open, its hinges screaming in the autumn wind. "Mom," Elena whispered. "I don't like it here." Miguel's chatter had stopped. He pressed his face to the window, eyes wide. "It looks like a haunted house." "It's just old," Maria said, but her own voice lacked conviction. The building seemed to watch them as they approached, its empty windows like hollow eyes. Harold Brennan waited by his city sedan, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who couldn't seem to stand still. His handshake was damp with nervous sweat. "Mrs. Santos, thank you for coming out here. Beautiful property, really. Just needs some love." Love. Maria looked at the building's crumbling facade and wondered what kind of love could resurrect something so clearly abandoned by hope. The interior was worse than the exterior. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that pierced broken windows. Their footsteps echoed in the main hall, where a grand staircase curved upward into shadows. Children's artwork still clung to some walls, faded and curling with age. A small handprint in blue paint, a crayon drawing of a house with smoke coming from the chimney. "Electricity will need work," Brennan was saying, his voice too loud in the silence. "Plumbing's probably shot, but the bones are good. Victorian craftsmanship. They don't build them like this anymore." Elena stayed close to Maria's side, her hand gripping her mother's arm. "Something happened here," she whispered. "Something bad. Honey, it's just an old building." But even as she said it, Maria felt it too. A heaviness in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. A sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Miguel wandered toward what had once been a playroom. Wooden toys sat arranged on shelves as if children had just stepped away for lunch. A rocking horse sat perfectly still in the center of the room, its painted eyes staring at nothing. "Can we afford it?" Elena asked quietly. $50. Maria had $53 in her checking account. The rest of their money was tied up in keeping utilities on for another few weeks at the apartment they were about to lose. "Mr. Brennan," Maria said. "Why $50? What aren't you telling me?" His face reddened. "Look, Mrs. Santos, I'll be straight with you. The city's insurance company is threatening to drop coverage on this property. We've had incidents, trespassers claiming they saw things, vandalism that we can't explain, equipment malfunctions during repair attempts. The city council wants it gone yesterday." "What kind of incidents?" "People hearing voices, doors opening and closing on their own. Local police get calls about lights in the windows, but when they investigate, the place is empty. Locked tight." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "Probably just kids playing pranks, but it's creating liability issues." Maria looked around the main hall, at the dust-covered furniture and the portraits on the walls. In one frame, a stern-faced man in 1940s clothing stared down at them. A small plaque read, "Dr. Friedrich Weber, Director 1938 to 1945. Something about his expression made her skin crawl. "Mom!" Miguel's voice came from the playroom, higher than usual. The horse moved. They turned to see him backing away from the rocking horse, which now swayed gently back and forth. The ancient floorboards creaked with each motion. "Old houses settle," Brennan said quickly. "Vibrations from walking can trigger movement in unstable objects." But Maria noticed his hands were shaking as he pulled out the sales contract. 20 minutes later, they stood outside the orphanage as the sun began to set. Maria held the deed in her hands, her name written in official ink as the owner of 15 acres and a building with more history than she was prepared to handle. "We'll move in this weekend," she told her children, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Elena nodded solemnly. Miguel asked if they could get a dog. That first night, they slept on air mattresses in what had once been the orphanage's administrative office. Maria lay awake listening to the house around them. Settling wood, wind through broken windows, the scurrying of small animals that had claimed the building as their own. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside their room. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped directly outside their door. Maria held her breath, straining to listen. The footsteps began again, moving away down the hall. She reached for her phone's flashlight and crept to the door, opening it slowly. The hallway was empty, but in the dust on the floor, she could see the clear impression of small, bare feet. A child's footprints, leading toward the main staircase. She closed the door quietly and returned to her air mattress, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Across the room, Elena sat up in the darkness. "Did you hear them too?" her daughter whispered. Maria's throat went dry. "Hear what, sweetheart?" "The children," Elena said simply. "They're crying." Elena woke to the sound of whispering. Not the kind of whispers that came from wind through old windows or the settling of ancient wood. These were deliberate, soft voices speaking words she couldn't quite catch, like a conversation happening just outside the reach of understanding. She lay on her air mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling of what had once been the orphanage's administrative office. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the walls. Miguel's breathing was deep and even beside her. Mom's mattress held only stillness, the kind that came from someone pretending to sleep. The whispers grew clearer. A child's voice, young and urgent. "She's awake now. She can hear us." Elena's skin prickled. She turned her head slowly toward the foot of her makeshift bed. A boy stood there. He was perhaps 10 years old, with dark hair and clothes that belonged to another era. Knickers, suspenders, a white shirt with a small tear at the collar. His skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight on water, and when he looked at her, his eyes carried a weight that no child should bear. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice barely more than breath. "My name is Tommy." Elena found her voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "You're dead." "Yes." No shame in the admission, just fact. "For a very long time now." She sat up slowly, glancing toward her mother's still form. "Mom can't see you. Not yet, but you can. You've always been able to see things others couldn't, haven't you?" Elena nodded. Since her father's death, the world had become layered with things that shouldn't be there. Shadows that moved independently of their sources. Voices in empty rooms. The feeling of being watched by eyes that belonged to no one living. "There are others," Tommy said, gesturing toward the darkness beyond the office door. "Children like me. We've been waiting for someone who could hear us." "What do you want?" Tommy's expression darkened. "Justice. The bad man who hurt us. He left things hidden. Dangerous things. Your family is in danger as long as they remain buried." "What kind of things?" "Come with me. I'll show you." Elena glanced at her sleeping brother, then at her mother's motionless form. Every instinct told her to wake them, to call for help, but something in Tommy's eyes, a desperation that echoed her own family's struggles, made her stand. Her bare feet made no sound on the old hardwood as she followed Tommy from the office. The hallway stretched before them, lit by moonlight streaming through tall windows. Portraits of long-dead benefactors watched from their frames, their eyes seeming to track her movement. "This was my home for 3 years, Tommy said as they walked. "After my parents died, this seemed like salvation. Dr. Weber promised we'd be safe here." They passed what had once been a dining hall. Long tables still held place settings, as if the children had simply stepped away for a moment. Elena could almost hear the echo of young voices, the clatter of forks against plates. "Dr. Weber lied," Tommy continued. "He used us, used our trust, our innocence. When some of us discovered his secret, he made sure we couldn't tell anyone." They stopped at a door Elena hadn't noticed during yesterday's tour. Heavy oak with iron hinges, it stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, stone steps descended into darkness. "The basement," Elena whispered. "Where he kept his treasures. Where he buried his crimes." Tommy's form flickered like candlelight in wind. "Your mother will find them soon. But she needs to know the truth about what they cost." Elena descended the steps, one hand trailing along the cold stone wall. The basement smelled of earth and age, with something underneath. something sweet and cloying that made her stomach turn. At the bottom, Tommy led her through a maze of storage rooms and mechanical spaces. Remnants of the orphanage's daily operations lay scattered about. Industrial washing machines, old coal furnaces, shelves lined with dusty preserves. "Here," Tommy said, stopping before what appeared to be a solid stone wall. "Touch it." Elena pressed her palm against the stones. They were warm, warmer than they should be in this underground space. As her fingers traced the mortar lines, she felt something give. A section of wall moved inward, revealing darkness beyond. "He thought no one would ever find it," Tommy said. "But children see things adults miss. We're small enough to hide in shadows, curious enough to explore forgotten places." Elena stepped through the opening. Her eyes adjusted slowly to reveal a room that defied everything she knew about basements. Clean white walls, climate control systems humming quietly, and covering every surface, paintings. Even in the dim emergency lighting, she could see they were extraordinary. Portraits of noble families, landscapes that seemed to breathe with life, abstract works that made her eyes water to look at directly. Each painting was perfectly preserved, mounted with museum-quality care. $320 million, Tommy said quietly. "That's what your mother will discover they're worth. Stolen from families, stolen from museums. Payment for terrible things done during a terrible war." Elena turned to face him. "You knew about these when you were alive. I found this room by accident. I was hiding from the older boys. They sometimes picked on the smaller children. I squeezed through a gap in the foundation that's been sealed now." His expression grew distant. "I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. Beautiful art hidden away like treasure. It seemed magical. But you figured it out. I heard Dr. Weber talking to men who came at night, men with accents like his. They spoke of families who would never reclaim their property, of museums that would never see their collections again." Tommy's fists clenched at his sides. "I understood enough to know it was wrong." Elena felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders. "You confronted him." "I was 10 years old and stupid with righteous anger. I thought if I threatened to tell the authorities, he would return the paintings to their rightful owners." Tommy's laugh held no humor. Dr. Weber had different ideas about problem-solving. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Elena's breath misted in the air as other figures began to materialize around them. Children of various ages, all bearing the same pale luminescence as Tommy. Their faces held expressions of loss that made Elena's chest ache. "Mary died of pneumonia," Tommy said, gesturing to a girl of perhaps 8 with blonde braids. "That's what the death certificate says." She actually discovered Dr. Weber's correspondence with Nazi officials. A boy of 12 stepped forward. "I'm James. Officially died of tuberculosis. Actually died because I saw Dr. Weber murder Mary." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sarah," said a girl no older than 6. "Heart failure, according to the records. Poison, according to the truth." One by one, they introduced themselves. 7 children, 7 mysterious deaths, 7 lives ended to protect one man's secret. "The adults who should have protected us failed," Tommy said. "The church looked the other way. Local officials were paid to ask no questions. We became inconvenient truths that needed to disappear." Elena felt tears on her cheeks. "How long have you been trapped here?" "Since 1943, Tommy replied. "Bound to this place by injustice. Unable to rest while the truth remains buried." Above them, floorboards creaked. Elena's mother was awake, moving through the orphanage. "She'll find this room," Tommy said. "Your mother has the kind of mind that doesn't accept easy answers. But she needs to understand that taking these paintings won't be simple. There are still people with investments in keeping our story quiet." "What do you want me to do?" "Help her make the right choice. The paintings are worth a fortune, yes. But they're also evidence of crimes that were never prosecuted. Blood money that could provide for your family or curse it." Elena looked around the hidden vault one more time. Beautiful art born from ugly history. treasure that came at the cost of children's lives. The treasure is hidden where the bad man thought no one would look, Tommy said as they prepared to return upstairs. But we saw everything. We remember everything. And we'll keep watch until justice is finally served. As they climbed the stone steps, Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her 12-year-old shoulders. She was no longer just Maria Santos' daughter struggling with her family's financial crisis. She had become the voice for children who could no longer speak for themselves. Behind them, the vault door swung closed with a soft click, hiding its secrets for another day. Maria woke to find Elena's air mattress empty. The morning light filtering through the tall windows cast everything in gray tones, making the administrative office feel more like a tomb than a temporary bedroom. Miguel still slept peacefully, his small fist curled against his cheek, but the space where her daughter should have been held only the impression of a body and tangled blankets. "Elena!" Maria called softly, not wanting to wake Miguel. No response. She pulled on her jeans and stepped into the hallway. The orphanage felt different in daylight, less ominous but somehow more melancholy. Dust motes danced in the morning sun, and the portraits on the walls seemed less menacing, more like echoes of lives once lived. "Elena, where are you?" A sound from below caught her attention. Footsteps on stone. Maria followed the sound to a door she hadn't noticed during yesterday's tour, finding stone steps that descended into the basement. Her maternal instincts flared. Basements in old buildings were dangerous. Rotted floors, exposed electrical, God knew what else. "Elena!" Her voice echoed in the stairwell. "Down here, Mom." Elena's voice drifted up from below, steady but strange. "You need to see this." Maria descended carefully, one hand on the stone wall for balance. The basement was larger than she'd expected, a maze of rooms that had once served the orphanage's daily operations. Industrial washers sat like sleeping giants. Coal furnaces loomed in corners. The air smelled of earth and old wood with something else underneath, something that made her social worker instincts prickle. She found Elena standing in front of what appeared to be a solid stone wall. Her daughter's face held an expression Maria had seen before, the look Elena got when she knew something she couldn't explain. "What are you doing down here, sweetheart?" "Touch the wall, Mom. Right here." Elena pressed her palm against a section of stones. "It's warm." Maria frowned but placed her hand where Elena indicated. The stones were indeed warm, noticeably so in the cool basement air. As she traced the mortar lines with her fingers, she felt something give. A section of wall moved inward with a soft grinding sound. "How did you?" Maria began, but stopped as the hidden door revealed a space beyond. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, illuminating a room that made no sense. Clean white walls, modern climate control systems, and covering every surface, paintings. Maria stepped through the opening, her breath catching. Even with her limited knowledge of art, she could see these were extraordinary. A portrait of a young woman in Renaissance dress, her eyes following Maria's movement. A landscape that seemed to pulse with life. Abstract works that challenged the eye and mind. Each painting was mounted with museum-quality care. Small plaques beneath many bore dates, names, and locations in multiple languages. But it was the stamps and markings on the backs that made Maria's stomach drop. Nazi provenance marks, official seals from the Third Reich, documentation of systematic looting. "Elena, how did you find this?" Her daughter was examining a smaller painting, a family portrait showing parents with 2 young children. "I had help," Elena said quietly. "The boy who used to live here, Tommy, he showed me." Maria's social worker training kicked in. Elena had been exhibiting signs of stress since Carlos's death. The drawings that depicted things she shouldn't know, the conversations with invisible friends, the nightmares. But this discovery was real, tangible. Whatever psychological processing Elena was doing, it had led them to something significant. She pulled out her phone and began photographing the paintings, the plaques, the Nazi markings. Her hands shook as she worked. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just valuable art. This was stolen history. Pieces ripped from families, museums, entire cultures during the darkest period of human history. Mom! Elena's voice was small. Tommy says there are records, papers that explain where everything came from. Maria looked around the room more carefully. In one corner sat a filing cabinet, its metal surface showing no signs of the rust and decay that marked everything else in the basement. She opened the top drawer to find meticulously organized files. Bills of sale with forged signatures, transport manifests, correspondence between Dr. Friedrich Weber and various Nazi officials. Her hands trembled as she read. Dr. Weber, the final shipment from the Rosenberg collection will arrive next Tuesday. Ensure the items are properly secured in your facility. The families will never see these pieces again, so authenticity documentation is unnecessary. Payment as agreed. Heil Hitler. Oberfuhrer Klaus Richter. Maria sank into a chair that shouldn't have existed in a hidden room that defied logic. The papers in her hands represented not just theft, but genocide. Families destroyed, cultures erased, beauty turned into currency for evil. How much is it worth? She whispered. Elena consulted what appeared to be air, then said, Tommy says the man with the numbers, an appraiser who came sometimes, called it $320 million. $320 million. Enough to solve every financial problem Maria had ever faced. Enough to give Elena and Miguel the education they deserved, the security they needed. Enough to honor Carlos's memory by ensuring his children never wanted for anything. But this wasn't just money. This was blood money. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her former supervisor at Child Services. Heard your house hunting. Hope you find something safe for the kids. Safe. Maria looked around the pristine vault with its climate-controlled environment and priceless contents. Was this safe? Could money built on such foundations ever provide true security? Elena was studying another painting, a street scene from what looked like 1930s Vienna. Tommy says Dr. Weber killed children who found this room. Elena, 7 of them. He made it look like illness, but they knew the truth about the paintings, about where they came from. Elena's voice carried conviction that chilled Maria. He couldn't let anyone tell. Maria's social worker instincts screamed warnings. Elena was processing trauma through fantasy, creating narratives to make sense of their desperate situation. But the room around them was undeniably real. The paintings, the files, the Nazi documentation, all of it existed regardless of how Elena had led them here. Above them, floorboards creaked. Miguel was awake. Elena, listen to me carefully. We don't tell your brother about this room yet. Not until I understand what we're dealing with. Tommy says there are still people who want to keep the secret buried. People who have power now because their families helped Dr. Weber then. Maria felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Report the discovery to authorities and risk losing any claim to finder's fees or rewards. Keep quiet and risk becoming complicit in covering up historical crimes. Take the art and become a thief herself. Leave it and watch her children suffer for her moral stance. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Harold Brennan. Mom! Elena's voice was gentle. Tommy wants to show himself to you. He says you need to see him to understand. Sweetheart, Tommy isn't. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. Maria's breath misted in the air as a figure began to materialize near the filing cabinet. Pale, translucent, but undeniably there. A boy in clothing from another era, his eyes carrying weight no child should bear. Mrs. Santos, the boy said, his voice like wind through empty rooms. My name is Thomas Whitmore. I died in this building in 1943, along with 6 other children. We were murdered to protect the secret you've discovered. Maria's rational mind rejected what she was seeing. Stress hallucination, grief manifestation, psychological break brought on by financial desperation and the responsibility of raising children alone. But her mother's instincts recognized truth when she heard it. Elena wasn't processing trauma through fantasy. She was communicating with the dead. What do you want? Maria heard herself ask. Justice, Tommy replied. The man who killed us thought he could hide the truth forever. But secrets have a way of surfacing. You have a choice now, Mrs. Santos. You can take this treasure and try to build a life on our bones. Or you can help us find peace by ensuring the truth is finally told." Maria looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly, at the paintings that represented both immense wealth and immeasurable suffering, at the ghost of a murdered child asking for something she wasn't sure she could provide. "I need time to think." "Time is something we have plenty of," Tommy said. "But your family's safety depends on the choice you make." Dr. Weber had accomplices who never faced justice. Their children and grandchildren still protect the family secrets. When word spreads about your discovery, and it will spread, they'll come for you. The ghost began to fade as Miguel's voice echoed from upstairs. "Mom? Elena? Where is everybody?" "I'll help you," Maria whispered to the empty air. "I don't know how, but I'll help you." The vault door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing away $300 million in stolen art and the promise of either salvation or damnation. 3 days of sleepless nights had left Maria hollow-eyed and desperate. Every creak of the orphanage's ancient bones made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Elena moved through the building with increasing confidence, carrying on conversations with empty air that made Maria's skin crawl. Miguel had started drawing pictures of children who weren't their children in old-fashioned clothes with sad, knowing eyes. The smart thing would be to pack up and leave. Take the kids back to their cramped apartment and figure out another way to avoid eviction. But the smart thing wouldn't solve their problems, and Maria had spent her entire adult life making smart choices that led nowhere. Sister Catherine Murphy. That name had appeared 17 times in the orphanage records Maria had found in Dr. Weber's office. Always as a witness. Always signing documents about children's deaths. Always present when convenient explanations were needed for inconvenient questions. The address in the church records led to Sunset Manor, a nursing home 40 minutes away in Millbrook proper. Maria left the children with strict instructions not to go into the basement and drove through countryside that looked different now. Less pastoral, more concealing. Every farmhouse might hide secrets. Every tree line could shelter watchers. Sunset Manor smelled of industrial disinfectant and resignation. The woman at the front desk looked skeptical when Maria asked to see Sister Catherine Murphy. "She doesn't get many visitors," the aide said. "Family members stopped coming years ago. Are you sure you have the right person?" "I'm researching the history of the Whitmore Children's Home. I understand she worked there in the 1940s. The aide's expression shifted to something between pity and concern. "Room 237. But I should warn you, Sister Catherine has good days and bad days. Sometimes she talks about things that... Well, you'll see." Room 237 held a hospital bed, a single chair, and an ancient woman who looked like she'd been carved from weathered wood. Sister Catherine Murphy sat by the window, her gnarled hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. "Sister Catherine?" Maria settled into the visitor's chair. "My name is Maria Santos. I wanted to ask you about your time at the Whitmore Children's Home." The old woman's head turned slowly. When her eyes focused on Maria, they held a sharpness that cut through the institutional haze. "You bought the building," Sister Catherine said. "It wasn't a question. How did you—" "The children told me you'd come. They've been visiting more frequently these past few days. Excited about something." Sister Catherine's voice carried the dry rasp of someone who'd spent decades whispering prayers. "Thomas Whitmore was here last night. He said his mother might finally get justice." Maria felt the temperature in the room drop. "You can see them too, child. When you've carried guilt for 80 years, the veil between worlds gets pretty thin." Sister Catherine gestured to the empty chair beside her bed. "They sit there sometimes. The ones who died on my watch. The ones I failed to protect." "Tell me about Dr. Weber." Sister Catherine's expression hardened. "Friedrich Weber was a monster who wore the mask of a saint. When I arrived at Whitmore in 1940, fresh out of the novitiate, he seemed like everything a children's advocate should be. Charming, educated, genuinely concerned for orphan children's welfare." She pulled a wooden rosary from her pocket, fingers working the beads with practiced rhythm. "I was 19 years old and believed authority figures told the truth. When children started dying and Dr. Weber explained their illnesses, I signed the death certificates without question. I trusted that men of education and position knew better than a barely trained novice nun. When did you realize something was wrong? October 15, 1943. I found Mary Kowalski crying in the chapel. She was 8 years old, scared out of her mind about something she'd seen in the basement. She said Dr. Weber was hiding pretty pictures that belonged to other people. Pictures that came in boxes marked with scary symbols. Sister Catherine's fingers stilled on her rosary. Mary died 3 days later. Pneumonia, according to the death certificate I signed. But pneumonia doesn't explain the bruises on her throat. Maria's stomach churned. You saw the bruises? I prepared her body for burial. Part of my duties. Fingerprint-shaped bruises around her neck. When I asked Dr. Weber about them, he said they were from medical intervention. Attempts to help her breathe during her final moments. Sister Catherine's laugh held no humor. I believed him because believing was easier than understanding what those marks really meant. But you started to suspect. James Patterson died a week later. Tuberculosis officially. But James had been asking questions about Mary's death. He was 12 and smart enough to know pneumonia didn't require that kind of medical intervention. Sister Catherine stood slowly, moving to the window. I started paying attention then, watching, listening. She pressed her palm against the glass. Sarah Mitchell was 6 years old when she found Dr. Weber's correspondence. Letters in German, official stamps, lists of artwork and monetary values. She brought one to me because she thought the pretty stamps might be valuable. What did the letter say? Payment confirmation for items received from the Rosenberg collection. Instructions for storage and eventual transport to South America. Details about maintaining documentation gaps to prevent future identification. Sister Catherine's reflection in the window looked ancient. I knew enough German from my studies to understand we were looking at theft documentation. Systematic looting. Maria leaned forward. You confronted Dr. Weber. I was young and righteous and stupid. I demanded answers. Weber was smooth, persuasive. He explained that he was helping preserve art that would otherwise be destroyed in the war. He said the original owners were dead, and the pieces would be returned to appropriate authorities after the conflict ended. You believed him? I wanted to believe him. The alternative was accepting that I'd been complicit in something monstrous. Sister Catherine returned to her chair. But then Sarah died. Heart failure in a healthy 6-year-old girl. When I prepared her body, I found the same bruises, the same fingerprint patterns. Maria felt sick. How many children did you? 7. 7 children died between October 1943 and March 1944, all from convenient illnesses, all after discovering some aspect of Weber's operation, all bearing marks that told the real story of their deaths. Why didn't you report it? Sister Catherine's eyes filled with tears that had been gathering for 80 years. I tried. I went to Father Morrison, the priest who supervised our work at the orphanage. He listened patiently, then explained that accusations against a respected doctor based on a novice nun's suspicions would destroy the church's reputation in the community. She pulled a folded envelope from her bedside drawer. When I insisted, Father Morrison arranged a meeting with Bishop Kowalski, Mary's uncle, as it happened. The bishop explained that the church couldn't afford scandal during wartime, that Dr. Weber's financial contributions kept multiple Catholic institutions operating, that sometimes individual tragedies had to be endured for the greater good. Maria reached for the envelope. Inside were photographs, documents, letters, decades of evidence that Sister Catherine had hidden and preserved. I stopped asking questions, Sister Catherine whispered. I signed the death certificates. I prepared the bodies. I kept silent while 7 innocent children were buried with lies carved on their tombstones. One photograph showed Dr. Weber standing with several men in expensive suits. Another showed crates being unloaded from a truck in the orphanage courtyard. A third showed children playing in the same courtyard, unaware they were living above stolen treasure. Weber left Whitmore in 1945, Sister Catherine continued. Claimed he was needed at a facility in Argentina. The art went with him, supposedly. I thought the nightmare was over. But you stayed silent. The church transferred me to a convent in Pittsburgh. Contemplative order. No interaction with the outside world. I spent 40 years in prayer and penance, believing I could somehow atone for my cowardice. Sister Catherine's voice broke. The children started visiting me in 1985. Tommy first, then the others. They told me the art never left Whitmore. Weber hid it and planned to retrieve it after the war ended, but he died in Argentina before he could return. Maria studied the photographs, trying to process the scope of what Sister Catherine was revealing. The church covered it up. The church protected its interests, as institutions do. Sister Catherine reached for Maria's hand with fingers that felt like paper. But you have a chance I never had. The children chose you for a reason, Maria Santos. Your background in social work, your understanding of how systems fail vulnerable people, your fierce love for your own children. They knew you'd fight when I couldn't. Fight against what? Weber's dead. The church officials are dead. Sister Catherine's grip tightened. Their children aren't dead. Their grandchildren aren't dead. Harold Brennan's grandfather was Sheriff Brennan in 1943, the man who classified 7 murders as natural deaths. Victoria Ashford's family owned the shipping company that transported stolen art for the Nazis. The corruption runs deep, Maria, deeper than you understand. How do you know about Brennan and Ashford? The children see everything. They watch. They listen. They remember. Sister Catherine pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with wax. I've spent 80 years documenting the truth. Names, dates, evidence that could expose everyone who participated in the cover-up. Everyone who profited from those children's deaths. Maria took the envelope, feeling its weight. Why are you giving this to me? Because the children won't rest until justice is served. And because you're going to need proof when the descendants of Weber's accomplices come for you. Sister Catherine's eyes held fierce determination despite her age. They know you found the vault, Maria. They're coming. Outside the nursing home, Maria sat in her car with Sister Catherine's evidence spread across the passenger seat. 80 years of cover-up laid bare in photographs and documents. A conspiracy that reached from Nazi Germany to small-town Pennsylvania, from wartime greed to contemporary corruption. Her phone buzzed. Elena, texting from the orphanage. Tommy says to hurry home. He can feel them watching the house. Maria gathered the papers and drove faster than she should have through countryside that no longer looked peaceful. Every car behind her might be following. Every intersection might hide observers. The children were waiting by the front door when she arrived. Elena's face held grave concern. Miguel clutched a drawing that showed dark figures standing in the trees around their new home. They're coming tonight, Elena said simply. Tommy says we need to be ready. Maria looked at the evidence in her hands, then at her children's faces. The smart choice would be to pack up and run. But running wouldn't solve anything. The truth had been buried for 80 years, and the weight of it was crushing everyone who tried to bear it alone. Then we'll be ready, Maria said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. It's time these children got the justice they deserve. Victoria Ashford arrived at sunset in a black sedan that whispered money and menace. Maria watched from the orphanage's third-floor window as the woman emerged, elegant, predatory, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Harold Brennan's truck followed minutes later, his desperation visible in the way he stumbled from the driver's seat. Behind him came a police cruiser, moving slowly up the long drive. Elena, take Miguel to the office and lock the door, Maria commanded. Mom, they're not here to help, Elena said, her young face grave. Tommy says the woman carries darkness like perfume. The doorbell's ancient chime echoed through the halls. Maria descended the grand staircase, Sister Catherine's evidence hidden in her jacket pocket, feeling like she was walking toward an execution. Mrs. Santos? I'm Victoria Ashford from Heritage Art Recovery International. Victoria's handshake was firm, practiced. I understand you've made some interesting discoveries. Detective Ray Morrison stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Morrison. We've received reports of unusual activity at this property." Harold Brennan hung back, sweating despite the cool evening air. His eyes darted constantly toward the basement entrance. "What kind of reports?" Maria kept her voice steady. "Lights in windows when the building should be empty," Morrison replied. "Sounds that concern the neighbors." Victoria's smile widened. "I'm particularly interested in any historical artifacts you might have uncovered. My organization represents families whose precious heirlooms were stolen during World War II. Maria felt the weight of Sister Catherine's documentation in her pocket. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Victoria's politeness had sharp edges. Dr. Friedrich Weber was known to have collected certain items of value, items that rightfully belong to families who've never stopped looking for them. Brennan finally found his voice. "Mrs. Santos, there might be irregularities with the property sale, legal issues that could affect your ownership." "Do you have a warrant?" Maria asked Morrison. The detective shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly. This is more of a welfare check." Victoria stepped closer, her perfume expensive and cloying. "Mrs. Santos, I think we should speak privately. There are significant financial opportunities here for someone willing to be reasonable." Above them, a door slammed shut with tremendous force. All four adults looked up as the sound echoed through the orphanage's vaulted ceilings. "Old buildings settle," Brennan said quickly, but his hands were shaking. Another door slammed, then another. The sounds moved through the building like a wave, each impact more violent than the last. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation outside," Victoria suggested, her composure cracking. "No." Maria's voice carried new authority. "You came to my home uninvited. You want to search my property without warrants. I think it's time you explained what you really want." The temperature around them dropped suddenly. Their breath began to mist as shadows deepened despite the exterior lights. Elena appeared at the top of the staircase. "Tommy says to tell the woman with painted claws that her grandfather Karl Richter was an SS officer who stole art from murdered families." Victoria went dead white. "That's impossible. How could she know?" "He says Detective Morrison's father destroyed evidence in 1944. Elena continued, her voice eerily calm. "Official police reports that documented the murders." Morrison took a step backward. "Kid, you don't know what you're talking about." "And Mr. Brennan's grandfather helped bury 7 children with lies carved on their tombstones." Elena's eyes found Brennan's terrified face. "Tommy remembers everything." Brennan broke first. "I don't know what game you're playing, lady, but I'm calling child services." His words were cut off as every window in the orphanage's front facade slammed open simultaneously. Wind that came from nowhere howled through the building, carrying voices that spoke in unison. "Justice." Victoria stumbled backward. "This is ridiculous. Parlor tricks and coincidences. Mrs. Santos, you have 24 hours to consider my offer before I involve federal authorities." "What offer?" Maria demanded. $5 million for anything of historical significance you might have found. Cash, no questions asked. Victoria's mask of politeness had disappeared. "Or I can make your life very difficult." Morrison was already retreating toward his cruiser. "Ma'am, I strongly advise you to contact me if you need assistance. This situation seems unstable." As the 3 vehicles disappeared down the drive, Maria closed the door and leaned against it. Elena descended the stairs, no longer moving like a 12-year-old girl. "They know about the vault," Elena said simply. "And they're scared." "Elena, how did you know those things about their families?" "Tommy showed me. The children see everything, Mom. They've been watching the descendants of Weber's accomplices for decades." Maria looked around the orphanage's main hall, seeing it differently now. Not just a building she'd bought out of desperation, but a battleground where the past and present collided. Outside, headlights appeared in the distance. More cars moving slowly up the drive. The war for the truth was about to begin. Elena's episodes had become violent. Maria found her daughter on the office floor that morning, thrashing against invisible restraints, her young voice screaming words in German she couldn't possibly know. Miguel cowered in the corner, his 8-year-old mind fracturing as he watched his sister relive someone else's murder. Neen, bit nicht, die Bilder gehören den Familien. Elena shrieked, her back arching impossibly as unseen hands seemed to grip her throat. Maria dropped to her knees, gathering Elena's convulsing form. Baby, come back to me. Come back. Elena's eyes snapped open, but they weren't her eyes anymore. Ancient pain stared out from her 12-year-old face. He's choking me again, she whispered in Tommy's voice. Weber won't let me tell about the paintings. The possession lasted 3 hours. When Elena finally returned to herself, she was hollow-eyed and exhausted, carrying memories that belonged to murdered children. Father Gabriel Restrepo arrived that afternoon in response to Maria's desperate phone call. The young priest looked impossibly calm for someone summoned to perform an exorcism, his dark eyes holding the weight of someone who'd seen faith tested by reality. This isn't demonic possession, he said after examining Elena. These children aren't malevolent spirits. They're trapped souls seeking justice. Can you help them? Maria asked. I can try to cleanse the space, give them peace to move on. But Mrs. Santos, they won't rest until their story is told, until the truth about their deaths is acknowledged. Gabriel spread salt in a circle around Elena, lighting candles at cardinal points while reciting prayers in Latin. But when he began the ritual cleansing, the orphanage itself rebelled. Every door in the building slammed open simultaneously. Windows shattered inward, spraying glass across hardwood floors. The temperature plummeted until their breath misted in the air, and 7 translucent figures materialized around the salt circle. We don't need cleansing, Tommy's spirit said, his voice echoing from every surface. We need justice. Elena sat up within the circle, her eyes reflecting otherworldly light. They want to show you something, Father. Something the church tried to hide. Gabriel's hands shook as he lowered his prayer book. What do you mean? The basement, Elena said in her own voice, though it carried harmonics of other children's voices. There's more than art down there. There are Weber's personal records. Proof of who helped him. Proof of who stayed silent. Maria looked at Gabriel's stricken face. You know something. The church archives, Gabriel whispered. When I was assigned to this parish, I found sealed files from the 1940s. Documents I was instructed never to open. Orders from the bishop to maintain confidentiality about certain wartime activities. The ghost children pressed closer, their forms becoming more solid as twilight deepened. Tommy stepped forward, his translucent hand pointing toward the priest. Your church took money from Weber, Tommy said. Donations that bought silence. The bishop knew children were dying, but the orphanage funding was too valuable to lose. Gabriel's face crumpled. That's impossible. The church protects children. Tell that to Sarah, said a small girl's voice. Tell that to Mary. Tell that to James. One by one, the murdered children stepped forward, each recounting their final moments. Weber's hands around their throats, his voice promising they'd be reunited with their parents soon. The sound of small bodies being dragged to the basement. He buried us beneath the foundation, Tommy continued. Our bones hold up the building where he hid his stolen treasure. We've been trapped here for 80 years, unable to rest while our murders go unpunished. Gabriel dropped his prayer book, tears streaming down his face. What do you want from me? Help the mother find our remains, Tommy said, his form beginning to flicker. Help her expose the truth. Help us finally go home. The ritual circle began to glow with soft light as all 7 children joined hands around it. Elena sat in the center, no longer possessed but somehow transformed into a conduit for their collective will. We're going to show you where Weber hid his records, Elena said, her voice harmonizing with the spirits. Everything he wrote down, every name of everyone who helped him, every dollar the church accepted to stay quiet. Gabriel looked at Maria with haunted eyes. If this is true, if the church was complicit, Then justice is more important than protecting institutional reputation, Maria finished, just like Sister Catherine finally realized. The ghost children began to fade as dawn approached, but their voices lingered. Tonight, when the moon is dark, we'll show you everything. As Gabriel packed his ritual supplies, his hands still trembling, he turned to Maria. Mrs. Santos, if we find what they're talking about, it won't just expose Weber. It'll expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of church hierarchy. People who are still alive, still in power. Maria looked at Elena, who was sketching in her notebook again. But now her drawings showed specific locations within the orphanage walls. Maps to hidden compartments. Diagrams of secret chambers. Then maybe it's time those people faced the consequences of their choices, Maria said. Outside, Victoria Ashford's sedan had returned, parked just beyond the property line. Watching, waiting. The children had chosen their champion. Now the real battle would begin. Weber's hidden records changed everything. Maria spread the documents across the orphanage's main dining table, while Elena served as translator for Tommy's spirit. Each page revealed another layer of the conspiracy that had protected one man's crimes for 8 decades. Payments to Sheriff Brennan, Maria read aloud. $50 per month to ensure death certificates weren't questioned. $100 for each evidence file that disappeared. Elena's voice took on Tommy's cadence. Harold's grandfather kept Weber's secrets because Weber kept photographs. Sheriff Brennan taking money. Sheriff Brennan helping move crates in the middle of the night. Miguel sat in the corner drawing obsessively. His latest sketch showed figures with faces obscured by shadows, standing around small graves. Here, Maria found another document. Payment to the Ashford Shipping Company. Transport of cultural artifacts to secure storage. Victoria's family moved stolen art for the Nazis. The ghost children gathered closer as Maria read, their translucent forms becoming more solid with each revelation of truth. Tommy pointed to a folder marked with church letterhead. The worst betrayal, Elena said in Tommy's voice. The church knew everything. Inside the folder, correspondence between Dr. Weber and Bishop Kowalski. Weber threatening to expose the church's financial connections to Nazi sympathizers unless they guaranteed his protection. The bishop agreeing to silence any investigations in exchange for Weber keeping certain secrets buried. Mutual assured destruction, Maria whispered. They were all complicit. Father Gabriel, who had returned to help with the investigation, went pale as he read the church documents. This goes all the way to Rome. Cardinal Hoffman, Archbishop Martinez, they all knew children were being murdered to protect stolen art. A car door slammed outside. Through the tall windows, Maria saw Victoria Ashford approaching with 3 men in expensive suits. Behind them, Harold Brennan stumbled from his truck, clearly terrified. They know we found the records, Elena said, her own voice now. Tommy says we're in danger. Maria gathered the most damaging documents, shoving them into a waterproof bag. Gabriel, can you get these to legitimate authorities? People who can't be bought? I know someone at the FBI, Art Crimes Division. But Mrs. Santos, if we expose this, it won't just destroy careers. It'll bring down institutions. Good, Maria said firmly. Some institutions deserve to fall. Victoria's voice echoed from the front hall. Mrs. Santos, we need to discuss your situation. Immediately. Maria handed the evidence bag to Gabriel. Backstairs. Get to your car and drive straight to the FBI. Don't stop. Don't call anyone. As Gabriel slipped away, Maria descended to face Victoria and her associates. The men wore the kind of suits that suggested violence was just another business expense. Mrs. Santos, Victoria's voice carried new urgency. You've stumbled into something much larger than you understand. There are national security implications here. National security? Maria kept her voice steady. Or family reputation security? Victoria's mask finally dropped completely. My family has spent 80 years building legitimate businesses. We won't let some desperate widow destroy that legacy over ancient history. Ancient history? 7 murdered children is ancient history? Those children died of natural causes. The official records are clear. Elena appeared at the top of the staircase. Tommy says to tell the scary lady that he has something for her. Elena held up a photograph from Weber's personal collection. Victoria in the image, recognizable despite the decades, was Victoria's grandfather. Shaking hands with SS officers while crates of stolen art were loaded onto Ashford shipping trucks. Victoria's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "The children see everything," Elena said simply. "They remember everything, including where your grandfather buried the witnesses." One of Victoria's associates stepped forward, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Mrs. Santos, you're going to give us everything you found, and then you're going to sign a statement saying this building contained nothing of historical significance." "Or what?" "Or your children will have an accident. Old buildings can be very dangerous. Gas leaks, electrical fires, structural collapses. Tragic things happen to families who don't know when to mind their own business." The temperature in the room plummeted. Every window in the front facade exploded outward simultaneously, spraying glass across the driveway. The chandelier above them began swinging violently, crystal pendants chiming like warning bells. Harold Brennan broke completely. "I can't do this anymore. My grandfather was dirty, okay? He took money to cover up murders. But I'm not a killer." "Shut up, Harold," Victoria snapped. "No, these people have kids. I won't be part of hurting kids." Brennan pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Detective Morrison. He needs to know what's really happening here." Victoria's associate drew a gun. "I don't think so." The weapon fired, but the bullet never reached Brennan. It stopped in mid-air, suspended by invisible force, then dropped harmlessly to the floor. Around them, the air filled with the voices of 7 murdered children, speaking in unison. "And no more children die for your secrets." The ghost children materialized fully, their forms blazing with otherworldly light. Tommy stepped forward, his young face terrible with righteous anger. "You want to hurt her children like Weber hurt us?" Tommy's voice echoed from every surface. "Try." Victoria and her associates fled, stumbling over each other in their panic to escape the orphanage. Their expensive car roared down the driveway, leaving only Brennan behind. "I'm sorry," Brennan sobbed, falling to his knees. "I'm so sorry for what my family did, for what I almost did." Elena approached him gently. "Tommy says your grandfather was scared too. Weber had photographs of everyone who helped him. Blackmail insurance. What do I do now?" Maria looked at the broken man, then at her daughter standing surrounded by the spirits of murdered children. "You tell the truth. All of it. Help us make sure this never happens again." Detective Morrison's sirens were already approaching, summoned by Gabriel's emergency call to the FBI. But as Maria watched the ghost children begin to fade with the approaching dawn, she realized the real battle was just beginning. The truth was finally emerging after 80 years of burial. But truth, she was learning, was the most dangerous weapon of all. FBI agent Sarah Chun arrived with the dawn, her credentials cutting through local jurisdictions like a blade. She studied Weber's confession with the intensity of someone who'd spent her career hunting stolen Nazi art. "This is extraordinary," Chun said, photographing each document. "We've been tracking the Rosenberg collection for decades. These pieces are worth more than 300 million, but their cultural significance is immeasurable." Maria watched from the orphanage's front steps as federal agents secured the hidden vault. Elena sat beside her, no longer translucent with ghostly possession but carrying the weight of truth finally being told. Detective Morrison approached, his badge catching the morning light. "Mrs. Santos, I owe you an apology. My father's files, I found them last night. Everything the children said was true. What happens now?" Harold Brennan's testimony is bringing down a network that's been operating since 1943. Victoria Ashford is already in custody. The church is cooperating fully. Morrison's voice carried the weight of institutional change. Justice, finally. Elena stood, her hand reaching toward empty air. "Tommy says they can rest now. The truth is free." Around them, 7 translucent figures materialized one final time. The murdered children of Whitmore smiled with peace they'd been denied for 8 decades. "Thank you," Tommy whispered, his form already fading. "We can go home now." The spirits dissolved into morning light, leaving only the living to carry their story forward. 6 months later, Maria stood in the orphanage's main hall, transformed. The water stains were gone, the broken windows replaced, the dust of decades swept away. Sunlight streamed through crystal-clear glass, illuminating walls now covered with photographs and documents that told the true story of the Whitmore Children's Home. The memorial to forgotten voices read the brass plaque beside the entrance. Below it, 7 smaller plaques bore the names of the murdered children: Thomas Whitmore, Mary Kowalski, James Patterson, Sarah Mitchell, and 3 others whose stories had finally been told. Elena moved through the memorial with the quiet confidence of someone who'd helped design every exhibit. At 13 now, she'd grown into her supernatural sensitivity, learning to use it as a gift rather than a burden. She paused before a display case containing Weber's confession, her fingers tracing the glass. "Do you still see them?" Maria asked, joining her daughter. "Sometimes, but they're different now. Peaceful. Tommy visits occasionally just to check on us. He says the other children have moved on to whatever comes next." Miguel burst through the front door, his arms full of wildflowers from the orphanage grounds. At 9, he'd become the memorial's unofficial groundskeeper, tending the children's garden they'd planted where Weber's victims had been buried. His skepticism had transformed into something deeper, an acceptance that the world held mysteries beyond logical explanation. "The school bus is coming," Miguel announced. 34th graders from Millbrook Elementary. They're studying World War II. Maria smiled, watching her son arrange flowers in vases throughout the hall. The memorial had become a popular educational destination, drawing thousands of visitors each year. Teachers brought students to learn about the Holocaust's local connections. Families came to trace artwork that had been stolen from their ancestors. Historians came to study how ordinary people could become complicit in extraordinary evil. But most importantly, the memorial served as a reminder that truth, however painful, was always preferable to comfortable lies. Dr. Rebecca Hoffman, the memorial's chief historian, emerged from the research wing carrying a thick folder. A survivor of the art recovery process herself, she'd become Maria's closest ally in ensuring the stolen artwork found its rightful homes. "Good news," Rebecca said, her slight German accent carrying joy. "The Rothschild family portrait found its permanent home yesterday. The Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York will display it alongside the story of how it was recovered." Maria nodded, feeling the familiar warmth that came with each successful repatriation. Over the past 6 months, 127 pieces of stolen art had been returned to families or appropriate institutions. The finders' fees and rewards had totaled more than $8 million, enough to transform their lives without compromising their principles. Any word on the Monet? Next week, the French government is sending a delegation to personally retrieve it. They're also awarding you the Legion of Honor for your role in recovering stolen cultural patrimony. Elena looked up from her exhibit work. Tommy would have loved this. He always said the art belonged with the families who treasured it. Detective Morrison arrived for his daily check-in, a ritual that had evolved from professional duty to genuine friendship. The investigation had transformed him from a burnt-out small-town cop into someone with renewed purpose. His testimony had been crucial in dismantling the network of corruption that had protected Weber's crimes. "Victoria Ashford pled guilty this morning," Morrison reported. 25 years federal prison. Her shipping company's assets are being liquidated to compensate families whose artwork was stolen. And the church settlements? Cardinal Martinez announced the final agreement yesterday. $50 million to Holocaust education programs, plus full disclosure of all wartime financial records. Father Gabriel says it's the largest institutional accountability gesture in modern Catholic history. Father Gabriel himself had been promoted to head the church's new Historical Justice Commission, dedicated to investigating other instances where institutional interests had superseded moral obligations. His first act had been to ensure the Whitmore Memorial received permanent church funding. Sister Catherine Murphy had lived to see justice served. She'd passed peacefully in her sleep 3 months earlier, her final words reportedly being, "The children can rest now." Maria had spoken at her funeral, calling her a woman who chose truth over comfort when it mattered most. Harold Brennan had become an unlikely ally, his grandfather's corruption transforming him into an advocate for government transparency. He'd resigned from city office and now worked as the memorial's community liaison, using his local connections to ensure the children's story reached every corner of Pennsylvania. The afternoon tour group included a family from Vienna whose great-grandfather's art collection had been stolen in 1938. Maria watched as they stood before a small landscape painting, tears streaming down their faces as they touched the frame their ancestor had commissioned 90 years earlier. "This painting hung in my great-grandfather's study," the elderly woman whispered. "My grandmother described it to me so many times, I felt like I knew every brushstroke. I never thought I'd see it again." These moments made everything worthwhile. The months of legal battles, the media scrutiny, the threats from people whose family secrets had been exposed. Watching stolen heritage return to its rightful guardians reminded Maria why she'd chosen justice over easy money. Elena was sketching again, but her drawings had changed. Instead of ghostly children and dark shadows, she drew families reunited with lost treasures, students learning from history, communities healing from institutional betrayal. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" Maria asked her daughter. Elena considered the question seriously. "I think so. I mean, we didn't get rich quick like we might have if we just sold everything quietly. But we got something better." "What's that?" "We got to be heroes to people who needed heroes. We got to give voices back to children who had been silenced. We got to prove that truth is stronger than lies, even when the lies have been protected for 80 years. Miguel overheard their conversation from across the hall. "Plus, we have the coolest house ever. How many kids get to live in a museum?" Maria laughed, looking around the transformed orphanage. They'd kept the top floor as their private residence, but the rest of the building served the public good. The kitchen where children had eaten their final meals now hosted community events. The playroom where toys had moved mysteriously now displayed artifacts from the investigation. The basement vault that had hidden stolen treasure now served as a climate-controlled archive. As evening approached and the last visitors departed, Maria walked through the memorial one final time. The children's photographs smiled down from the walls, school pictures from the 1940s showing faces full of hope and innocence. Below each photo, their stories were told truthfully. Not sanitized versions that protected institutional reputations, but honest accounts of young lives cut short by adult greed and cowardice. In the memorial's guest book, visitors had left thousands of messages. "Thank you for not letting them be forgotten. My grandmother's painting is finally home because of your courage. This place changed how I think about standing up to powerful people who do wrong things." Elena found her mother in Tommy's dedicated exhibit space, a corner where his belongings had been displayed alongside his story. A worn teddy bear, a composition book filled with careful handwriting, and a small photograph of him with his parents before they were killed. "He's proud of us," Elena said quietly. "All of them are. They got what they needed most. Not revenge, just truth. Just being remembered as real children who mattered, not inconvenient problems that needed to disappear." Maria put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. They'd paid a price for their choice. The stress of investigation, the loss of anonymity, the ongoing responsibility of running a memorial. But they'd gained something invaluable, the knowledge that when faced with an impossible moral choice, they'd chosen correctly. Outside, stars appeared in the Pennsylvania sky. The orphanage that had once hidden terrible secrets now stood as a beacon of accountability and hope. 7 murdered children had finally received justice, and their story would ensure future generations understood the cost of institutional silence. The Santos family had found their home at last. Not just shelter from the world, but a place where justice and love could flourish together. 2 years had passed since the Santos family first crossed the threshold of the Whitmore children's home, But the woman who now stood in the memorial's main hall bore little resemblance to the desperate mother who'd once clutched eviction notices with shaking hands. Maria adjusted the microphone at the podium, looking out at an audience that filled every chair in what had once been the orphanage's dining hall. Representatives from 12 countries sat in the front row, their presence a testament to how far the truth had traveled. Behind them, Holocaust survivors, their children and grandchildren, art historians, and students from universities across North America filled the restored space. Today marks the second anniversary of the Whitmore Memorial. Maria began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned that truth-telling was its own form of power. 2 years since 7 murdered children finally received the justice they'd been denied for 8 decades. Elena, now 14 and poised beyond her years, sat in the front row beside Miguel, who'd grown into a thoughtful 10-year-old with dirt perpetually under his fingernails from tending the memorial gardens. Both children had learned to carry their extraordinary experiences as a gift rather than a burden. But today isn't just about remembering the past, Maria continued. It's about announcing our future. Dr. Rebecca Hoffman joined Maria at the podium, carrying a folder that contained documents more hopeful than any they'd previously unveiled. The International Justice Foundation has approved our proposal, Rebecca announced. The Whitmore model will be implemented at 23 sites across 4 continents. The audience erupted in applause. The Whitmore model, using recovered assets to fund memorials, education programs, and family reunification services, had proven so successful that governments and NGOs worldwide wanted to replicate it. What had begun as one family's desperate choice had evolved into a blueprint for institutional accountability. Ambassador Kaufmann from the German delegation stood to address the crowd. The Federal Republic of Germany pledges €2 million to support Whitmore model implementation. We believe that facing historical truth, however uncomfortable, is essential for preventing future atrocities. Maria felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced each time stolen artwork found its rightful home. But this was larger. This was transformation on a scale she'd never imagined possible. After the ceremony, as delegates mingled and planned future collaborations, Elena slipped away to the memorial's quiet corner dedicated to Tommy Whitmore. She often came here when the weight of public attention became overwhelming, seeking the peace that had eluded the building for so many decades. "You did it," she whispered to the photograph of a 10-year-old boy whose courage had changed the world. "Justice for everyone, just like you wanted." The temperature around her shifted subtly, and Elena smiled. Tommy's presence was different now. Lighter, visiting not from trapped desperation but from grateful affection. He appeared beside her, translucent but radiant with peace. "We did it," Tommy corrected gently. "You and your mother, Father Gabriel, Detective Morrison, even Harold Brennan. Everyone who chose truth over convenience. Do you miss being alive?" Tommy considered the question with the wisdom of someone who'd spent decades watching the world change. "I miss the possibility of growing up, having a family, contributing to the world in ordinary ways. But Elena, what we accomplished together, what you're still accomplishing, touches more lives than any ordinary existence could." Elena nodded, understanding. Her supernatural sensitivity had evolved into something purposeful. She now worked with other children who'd experienced trauma, helping them process grief and find their voices. Her ability to connect with those who couldn't speak for themselves had become a calling rather than a curse. "Will I see you again? When you need guidance, I'll be here. Not trapped anymore, but choosing to stay connected to the work we started." Tommy's form began to fade as afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows. "Take care of your family, Elena. Take care of the truth we fought for." As Tommy dissolved into warm light, Elena felt the rightness of his departure. The children of Whitmore had finally found peace, but their legacy lived on in the work that bore their names. Miguel found her there 20 minutes later, his hands full of lilacs from the memorial garden. "Mom says it's time for the family dinner," he announced. "All the important people want to meet us." Elena ruffled her brother's hair, still amazed by how normal he'd become despite everything they'd experienced. His nightmares had faded. His drawings now showed living children playing in sunshine rather than ghostly figures trapped in shadows. "Did you know that lady from France used to own one of the paintings from our basement?" Miguel asked as they walked toward the family's private quarters. "She said her great-grandmother painted it herself before the Nazis took everything." "That's wonderful, Miguel. Every piece that goes home makes the world a little more just." Their mother was waiting in the kitchen they'd carved out of the orphanage's former administrative wing. The space managed to feel both historically significant and thoroughly domestic, a place where important work was planned around family meals and homework assignments. "How did the announcement go?" Elena asked. "Better than I hoped. The foundation approved funding for memorials in Poland, France, Argentina, and 8 other countries. Each one will use our model, recovered assets funding education, family reunification, and community healing." Maria stirred a pot of soup that filled the kitchen with warmth and the scent of home. She'd learned to cook properly over the past 2 years, finding peace in providing nourishment after so many years of struggle. Their life now held abundance, not just financial security, but the richness that came from meaningful work and healed relationships. "Are you happy, Mom?" Miguel asked, the question carrying weight unusual for a 10-year-old. Maria considered her answer carefully. "I'm proud. I'm fulfilled. I'm grateful. Whether that adds up to happiness, I think it adds up to something better. It adds up to purpose." Elena helped set the table for their guests, delegates and survivors who'd become like extended family over the past 2 years. The dining room where children had once eaten their final meals now hosted celebrations of justice served and families reunited. As evening deepened and their guests shared stories from their own country's struggles with historical accountability, Maria looked around the table and marveled at the transformation. They'd begun this journey as a desperate family fleeing eviction. They'd evolved into advocates for voiceless victims and guardians of uncomfortable truths. "There's something I need to tell you both," Maria said as they prepared for bed that night. "The Justice Foundation has asked me to serve as Director of International Operations. It would mean traveling, speaking at conferences, consulting on new memorial sites." Elena and Miguel exchanged glances. They'd grown skilled at reading their mother's moods, understanding when she was asking for permission rather than announcing decisions. "Would we go with you?" Elena asked. "Some trips, yes. Others I'd travel alone. You're both old enough now to understand what this work means, what it could cost us in terms of normal family life." Miguel spoke first, his young voice carrying unexpected wisdom. "Mom, we stopped being a normal family the day we moved into a haunted orphanage. But we became something better, a family that fights for people who can't fight for themselves." Elena nodded. "The children who visit here, the families who recover their stolen artwork, the students who learn about standing up to institutional corruption, they need advocates. If we can help more places become like Whitmore, we should." Maria felt tears gathering in her eyes. Her children had grown into people she admired, shaped by extraordinary circumstances into compassionate advocates for justice. Carlos would have been proud of who they'd become. "Then we accept," Maria said. "All of us together, the Santos family, guardians of uncomfortable truths." As they settled into sleep in the orphanage, they transformed into a beacon of hope. Elena felt one final presence in her room. Not Tommy this time, but all 7 children together, their forms barely visible but radiating contentment. "Thank you," they whispered in unison, "for giving us voices, for making our deaths mean something, for proving that truth is stronger than lies, justice more powerful than corruption." The ghost children faded into starlight streaming through Elena's window, finally at peace. Their story would live on not as a tragedy to be hidden, but as a testament to the courage required to choose right over easy. Outside, the Pennsylvania countryside stretched under a full moon, holding new secrets and old injustices still waiting to be uncovered. But the Santos family slept peacefully, knowing they'd become the kind of people who chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. In a world that often rewarded silence about institutional failures, they'd proven that some things mattered more than survival. They'd discovered that home wasn't just shelter from the world's storms, but a place where integrity and love could flourish together. creating ripples of justice that reached far beyond anything they'd imagined possible. The haunted orphanage had finally found peace, and the family that had given it new life had found their calling, to ensure that no murdered child's voice would ever again be silenced by powerful people protecting comfortable lies. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.